I'm Francesco from Rome, Italy, and I lead Re di Spade, King of Swords class in Rome and some classes near Rome. I lead to the HEMA brand in Italy, that is a brand of events about HEMA in a lot of different styles. I started HEMA about 10 years ago in Italy, started to immediately study what comes from the Liechtenauer tradition and what comes from the Fiore tradition. In the common HEMA ambient, we usually say Italian and German longsword styles, differentiating them. From the start of my study, I immediately asked to myself, why? Why? What? Why? And all the because there is so many differences. There are so many differences. And I started all my experience try to answering this question. Of course, it's an utopic question. We are not in machine time, so we can never understand this, but was interesting to, every time I open a manuscript, try to cross over from a German to Italian to Italian to German. Today, I want to present you what is actual point about my studies. I have no answers, I have no truths to give to you, but I really hope to give you new questions. That wasn't the same questions I had when I started to practice and to teach HEMA. So, the first thing that is a fact is actually the manuscript, the early manuscript, Babylon's work, we could find available for everyone, are in these 20 years, about, of course, these dates are all about, and not more, and we have the Codex Dobringer, sorry for pronunciation, the Wallenstein, and then we have 3 different editions of the Fiore. Actually, the first question, the very first question I asked to myself, and I asked to some professor which I work with, is, are they alpha codices? Are they codices written from the Magister directly? Because if they are very good sources to study, because the master personally write or supervise the writing and the drawing of the manuscript. But if they are not, what we are seeing? Of course, our sources, of course, are very important, but we have something to go more deeper and deeper in our study. Because if they are not alpha codices, it's probably someone that copied them. In the copy could be or errors, or, that is more interesting, addings. And we know that could be a copy of a copy. And we know that could be the copy of a copy of a copy. And then go on over. I immediately contacted some academic experts, some people that work with manuscripts, with ancient letters, with ancient characters, and I asked them, could you please study this manuscript and tell to me if they are alpha codices? History, of course, is not a truth, but the Professor Calcagno, that I don't see here right now, it's coming, is a professional student about German, not only manuscript, but all the contacts from Italy to Germany and all written about Italy and Germany, say that probably all the manuscripts we actually have, and I'm speaking about only medieval, so I don't speak nothing about Renaissance, only medieval, please, are not alpha codices. They all are copies. They are copies. I can't explain you all the why, because we need 1 or 2 weeks to, and it's a conference about it. But what, Professor, welcome, say to me that it's a problem in the style of the written. I'm very sorry I couldn't go more deeper about it because it's a very, very long question. It's very, very technical about the historical area. But that's a problem. This changes nothing about our study, but it is interesting to know that we are actually copies of the original manuscript. So, it's another question in my mind immediately after. Are manuscripts, manuals, a complete how-to guide from step 0 to step X? Could be a basic or an advanced manual. And are manuscripts written to be diffused? So, about the first questions, if we have in hand a medieval manuscript, we didn't find nothing about the step 0. Absolutely nothing. It's very hard to find, okay, you know nothing, start with the foot position, start with this, do this exercise, we have something. Yes, there is something. But we have not a complete how-to guide to start. So we need other interpretation, we need to share on internet in this kind of events all our impressions, and more. Are manuscripts written to be diffused? This is another question. Because, for example, Italian manuscripts are written to be like present, like art. Many of them are poems. Many of them are the artists that draw prefer the beautiful of the drawing than the technical of the drawing. If you speak with an expert, they say that the technical drawing was invented in the Renaissance. So it's not technical. So we are looking something very, very, very hard to understand. Fiore delivery in this passage of the manuscript say that I'm very happy in the Getty edition at the start of the product. I'm very happy because they paid me very well. Of course. It's funny, but it's interesting because a good teacher costs a lot. A good teacher costs a lot. A manuscript costs more than a lot. Having a manuscript costs a lot. So it's a teaching, not for everyone, and very, very expensive. This is another question that came in my mind. Was fencing professional teaching of the time for everyone? It's another question. Sources are not oriented in this part because Fiore wanted to be paid very well or didn't have your cut. But we know that there are soldiers, officers that using swords, and we know, and later we explain again, that they had duels and fights with swords. Okay, so teaching was for everyone, but probably professional teaching was not for everyone. And this is another good question that will return until during my lecture. So keep in mind this type of point of view I had when I go to study and to try to understand. Okay. There are two big families of duel for honor. Manuscript speaks mainly about duel. There are too many families. Tournament, that is a question of honor, but it's could today speak about sport in question. Sporting is not a word useful for Middle Ages, but to understand. Actually, tournament is a sort of sport, and to solve questions of honor. Solve questions of honor could be very similar to a tournament, so nobody hurt very much, or could be to death. Depend from the situation. Try to speak about tournament or just start. Very rich organization. A tournament is very, very rich. It's the soccer world championship of the Middle Ages. Very rich equipment. And you have an armory full of this very rich equipment for the tournament. And sometimes useful for only a particular discipline. You can see the armor for the horse in just is particular than the armor for the foot fencing, for example. Different disciplines, and mainly riding an horse. The main fencing was with horses in rich tournaments because Nobles wants to show they was rich, and they was absolutely out of the normal society. Often we found Greek melee with many knights in the same time. Some sources for the book of Professor Cavina, that will be translated in English next year, say that sometimes Greek melee was a sort of unofficial tournament with a lot of 1 versus 1 beat one, then start with another, but we can be sure. And nobles show their social position. Again, that's a tournament dedicated equipment for your Vienna armory, so this is not useful for war or for fencing battle, but it's very useful for justing. So, tournament's main goal is not to solve a question or to kill an enemy, mainly speaking. Today we could call this sport. In many sources, nobles defended their right to duel with training reasons. Sometimes the church, the Vatican, say, no, no violence, please, stop all the tournaments. And nobles say, okay, we stop the tournaments, we will not train in war, and the next time another religion comes to invade you, we are not training to defend you. And church say, okay, do tournament. It's very simple, but it's not so. You can find tons and tons of sources about this. One's right about yes, one's right about no. Many judges wrote about it. And a book about this will be published next year in English, actually, we are all in Italian. So that's the way we see armored nobles with rich equipment we just spoke about. I'm trying to go very fast because we lost some time. So the question is, could it be possible to die during a tournament? To kill is not the main goal. But yes, sometimes people die. Henry II, King of France, died during a tournament, during a just, in the 1559. And we know from sources that sometimes tournament was a peaceful duel, but could be possible as some revenges inside the peaceful duel. For example, Henry IV, King of France, sometimes after Henry II died, did to Bassompierre on the February of 65. All the sources about honor duel are taken from Il Sangue dell'Onore, the blood of the honor, of Professor Cavina. The new book will be in English and will be The Armed Gentleman. Had to be ready for this event, but unfortunately the translator had a lot of time translating all technical parts because the professor used a very historical technical language. I have the honor to supervise the work in the technical with arms part, and they say will be ready at the end of the year and publish it for all people in English in the next year, probably for next events. From tournaments exists something called death justs. So it's, I personally don't know all the involvement, but exists a way that sometimes tournament could become very dangerous, and people could die during the tournament. Of course, was tournaments not for weddings or for nobles, very rich situations, but could happen. We are the source that say that sometimes they bring with them real sharpened weapons, and we do to the death or to the surrender. And in Latin, the source say the tournamentum maculetum et hostile, or to death or to surrender. And these are a type of tournament. And this is very strange because it's a connection from tournament and from duel to solve, question of honor. Another duel for honor that is very interesting to know, to return to our Science of the Duel athlete on the manuscript, was the passe d'armes. A knight occupied a part, a land, or a bridge, for example, an area for a specific time, sending challenges via mail to each other, to all the entire Europe, or the entire large areas. And he written his rules about the tournament. We will return to the rules later. Judges were all the knights, and sometimes normal judges that write all the documents we read about it. This act was often dedicated to madame, to a girl, and sometimes they built a lot of scenography with, I don't know, flowers, the name. Like today with the sprite, you say, "Oh, Jessica, I love you," or something similar. And it's interesting because lots of public normally know it and come to see it. So it's a tournament, very, very particular one. In this type of tournament, of course, could happen that I love a girl and dedicate a tournament to her, another one loves this girl. So when this other one comes, probably it's not so peaceful, the duel. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. So the other big family of duel was to solve questions. Reclaiming honor for every reason. Every reason was good for reclaiming honor. And I want to duel. You touch me. I want to duel. Depends from situation, from country, social, culture, from many, many things. There were duels to death or to surrender, and the offended choose offensive weapons. So, could duel with or without armors, and this is an interesting, very interesting passage, but with the same identical equipment. So we could decide to bring only a shirt and a sword, but they had to be identically. So, was not uncommon, especially in Italy, that the offended choose very particular and exotic weapons, and especially in the late Middle Ages and in the start of the Renaissance. Exotic, invented arms and armors, sometimes too equal, because they had to be equal, to be not useful to the other or with illogical features. I bring you some examples. Sometimes it could happen that a very big fat guy go to duel to a very slim guy, like me. The fat guy, for example, was the offended and chose very large armors. When was the time of the duel, he brought two very large armors, because they had to be equal. And the other one couldn't wear very well and died sometimes, many, many times. In Italy, there are sources about a very, very tall guy that offended a very, very, very small guy. These guys choose the weapon. Sometimes the weapon was presented only the last day, the day of the duel. There are a lot of problems in judging this, because many judges say, no, you have to present 6 months before. The other reply, no, it's not right. You find tons and tons of manuscripts and letters about it, but at the end of the question, happened that many, many times they found there what they will use in the duel. So this small guy produced some armors with spikes in the neck. So the very small fencer with the head up with no problems, but the very tall with fence because he had the spikes in the neck. You found the sausage spike. And the tall died immediately. The last one example, one noble offended choose for weapons, full armor with one hole here. For all the time he waits the duel, almost 6, 8, or 1 year could pass, he trained only to trust. The day of the duel, after 3 seconds, he trusted the hole, and the other one died, because the other one didn't know what happened. So he tried armor with a hole, oh my god, where, and died immediately. You find all these very funny things in the book of the professor. Another interesting thing. Sometimes could happen that all the weapons were equal, chosen from the offended, but the offended sent all the technical explications to the other, and the other had to buy to bring to the duel. So I choose longsword of 2 meters, I send you all the specifications, you have to come in the duel with your longsword, but with the same identical technical parts like me. A knight from Farnese, north of Rome, spent all his money to arrange a duel, because the other one was very, very rich, very rich. So from 100,000 scudi, shields, become very poor of 200 scudi. All the rest in the equipment. He spent everything to have the equipment to duel, because he cannot refuse to duel. He became Knight of Malta to survive, so he entered in an order to have the food, because he became poor. And he's very famous because he said, Yakenak, that is the other one, is French. There is French people, so I don't read in French because I know not the pronunciation. But Jarnac wanted to fight with me with his pickpocket, not with his sword. And this is something happened. So they asked a lot of expensive stuff that they cannot buy or have some problem about it. So, another question. What about soldiers, non-nobles but professionals in arms? Especially what about petty officers and officials? And we return to our start. In the middle of the 16th century, so in the Renaissance, in Italy, were often involved with duels with only sword, shield, and sometimes dagger, and from the source, not so much more. Marozzo and what is called Bolognese school. Side sword, dagger sometimes, cape sometimes, will be an interesting workshop the day after tomorrow, and shirt. And this is very particular, and we return to our first point, because Rangoni Popoli was a duel from these two guys, was a premise because before that, in the sources written, that before that day, that two nobles come to fight with shirt, sword, and something else, but not so much more. The duel with sword and only shirt was considered only villain's manner. So, for nobles, before the Renaissance, this source says that the duel from nobles was in rich equipment, in armor, mainly. What kind, we don't know, with a lot of differentiation. And only villains, say the search, duels without nothing, only the sword. In Italy and outside, so in Europe, Germany and all the Europe, just from the 15th century, this style was common between low-grade soldiers. So we know that low-grade soldiers have duel in that way. And this is again from the same source. So this type of sword and nothing more, not so much more, was approved for many judges. Judges of honor, so it's professors of honor at the time. They wrote manuscript about it and a lot of sources, like Fausto da Lungiano. He's considered ridiculous, every tricks made in past, so they did it mainly to avoid that people could invent the spikes in the neck or the flat armors or everything else. And they say he's most honorable now because you have only to bring a sword and prove your skills. And you cannot have tricks or not honorable advantages, blessing, sword and shield, and simpler duel. Okay. Okay. So, strictly speaking about fencing on foot, we can duel with this rule of engagement. I now return to speak about our fencing. Rules of engagement, so tournament could be armored, mainly armored, very lethal, and today we could call it a sport, a sort of sport. And honor, armored or not armored, depends from the situation, from the economical and social position, and from the, probably to the ranking of the fact. And of course, to death or to surrender, that is the same thing, because if you don't die immediately, if you have a wound or something that doesn't allow you to continue, you have to surrender, then the other one can choose to kill you or not. So, this is a question. What are masters on actual, what we have now, manuscripts talking about? So, we had an overview about all things, but now, returning to our sources. I am a modern practitioner. I open my manuscript. What I'm seeing? What masters want to say to me? How can I take all I need for my purpose here to win the Wien tournament? Are they teaching us how to duel? In which context? It's tournament, it's honor, it's for soldier. Why did they write these codices? It's the same question we did have. Which was the cost of a medieval manuscript at the time? And another thing to say is that, for example, many medieval Italian manuscripts inside are written dedicated to the Duke, is a present for the prince, it's something that they didn't write to diffuse the art to people, to soldiers, and sometimes to other nobles. It's a present. Fiore wrote the manual very, very late in his life. Was a present for the people that pay him very, very well in the whole life. So he didn't write something to teach them, because he teaches them for 40 years. It's probably the best techniques they ever did, or something they particularly do very well in tournaments. We don't know this, but it's interesting to think in this way. Fact from sources. And now is the first comparison from what we call German and what we call Italian. And it's an interesting passage from the Dobringer. But he traveled and searched through many lands since he wanted to learn and experience this art. Fiore. I learned fencing from Italian and German masters in many cities. I teach to many Italian and German nobles Sbarra tournament combat. This is very interesting. So, masters traveled. Masters learned from other masters, from all the Europe, from all the possibilities they had. So, return to the main question. Why that are different schools? Why Fiore has not spoken out in his manuscripts? We continue our lecture. Why do some codices seem different in style, what we just said? First thing I analyzed, one of the first things I analyzed, I asked it to an historical art professor. He's not here today, unfortunately. She had a lot of background in understanding of draws, in technically and in codices of what an artist drew in the Middle Ages on a manuscript. She said to me that images on manuscripts are illustrative, not informative. They are illustrations, not informations. We can interpret informations for that illustration, but it's not the goal of the artist. It's not technical draw. We don't see what the technician wants to say has to put the time. And text, when present, contains the main information. So the main information is never in the paint, is never in the draw, but is in the text. Mainly speaking, of course, we are speaking about history. I had an example, is my preferred, from the Fontanzig. This is a fluke, impossible to do if you have the bones. If you have the shoulder inside the right place, you cannot do it. And this is interesting if you analyze this ox with the eye on the sword. Okay, so it's illustrative, it's not informative. So we cannot, you all practice German school. I never see you in this position, of course. So it's interesting to analyze and to let this information to make us new questions. Many times, and this is another interesting thing, we found not armored characters practicing armored fencing. Sometimes I see that when you see armored guy on the draw, is an armored fencing. When you see not armored, it's not armored. It's not true, because this is Taloffer from the displacement, trusting, you don't see very well. I try to, you see from here, perhaps, better? No? No, it's a it's the technique with Pommel and it's armored. From displacement, thrusting away was completed strike, and immediately after before stepping and throwing over the shank. So it's the 1 and 2. But the other one, the next one, is not armored, but it was speaking about armored. This is another interesting question we have to do to ourselves when we are looking to draw manuscripts, because everything changes if we are not protected or protected. So, have we today the most ancient manuscripts? Did masters know all the rules of engagement we just speak about? Try to answer to this question. Of course, for the first question, there is not the slide. For the first question, we have not all the ancient manuscripts. We don't know if there are most ancient and all the manuscripts we have from that time. And from the second question, it's not a question of knowing, in my opinion, because it depends from the place, depends from what happened. A noble could have a duel in tournament and go to a master that teach the tournament, but the same master could have a lot of problems about non-armored and armored. And Fiore wrote in the Geti, in the prologue, I received envy from others. Speak about magisters, other magisters.